This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it's Wednesday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. In today's video, we're going to look at Lords. It may come as a bit of a surprise that I haven't already done this one, given that I've done 310 plus MTG Top 10s at this point. This is one that took me a while to do, just because I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to define Lord. Lord was once an actual creature type in Magic, but how it was used was wildly inconsistent. Sometimes it showed up on creatures that granted some kind of bonus to other creatures with a specific type, but sometimes it just appeared on random cards that aren't actually tribal at all, like Chorus of the Conclave and Darien, King of Keldor. Today, when people say Lord, they're generally referring specifically to a card that grants some kind of bonus to creatures of a certain type, but personally, I think that's too broad of a definition. For me, there's a line to draw between a card that grants a tribal payoff and a card that is a Lord. A Lord is just a kind of tribal payoff. For me, Lords have to grant some kind of stats boost to creatures of a given type. That means I think something like Soaring Thought Thief is a Lord, while I don't think Rakish Heir is. Sure, the Heir gives all of your vampires a new ability, but that just isn't enough for me. Additionally, a card that grants a stats boost to all creatures of a given color or with a certain keyword, or all creatures, in general aren't Lords either. I think of those as Anthem effects since they are broader than a single creature type. I'm sure some of you will disagree with how I defined Lord here, but that's how it goes with unofficial terms in Magic. This isn't something clearly defined by Wizards, so what is meant by Lord can certainly be subjective. Anyhow, obviously enough, Lords are highly sought after for tribal decks, and they go a long way towards making a deck built around a creature type particularly viable. Lords tend to add damage to the board even before they can attack themselves and give you a ton of value for their mana investment. Alright, before we get into the list, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A Pro Tour, Mythic Championship, Players Tour, or Mythic Invitational Top 8 is worth 2 points, as are Legacy and Vintage Championship Top 8s, and a Grand Prix or Magic Fest Top 8 is worth 1 point. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, it is Mare of Avabruck, a Lord that is a double-faced card, so it has a pretty neat design. You cast it as Mare of Avabruck, which is a human lord, but the mare is also a werewolf, and it has the usual werewolf transformation clause. And once it turns into Halpak Alpha, it's no longer a human lord, but instead it pumps all your wolves into werewolves. It also turns out a 2/2 wolf every single turn, and that wolf will be a 3/3 as long as Halpak Alpha is around. And you get all of that for only 2 mana. And sure, sometimes it's hard to control when your werewolves do and do not transform, but both sides of this bring some serious value, even if the Halpak Alpha side is the absurdly powerful one. Like a lot of the best Lords in the game, the Mare comes from a set with a tribal focus, Innistrad. On that plane, green-white is all about humans and red-green is all about werewolves, so the Mare does a good job of helping both of those creature types. That said, werewolf decks never really took off in Constructed, and as a result, the Mare was only played in human decks in Block and Standard. It also has a single point from a modern human deck from 2017, but most modern human decks don't play the Mare, so it may not be gaining any more points anytime soon. At number 9, it is Wizened Sen. Kithkin is not a creature type that newer players will be familiar with. There's only 61 of them in the entire game, and it's been more than a decade since we've seen a new one printed. However, they were pretty darn powerful back in the days of Lorwyn block. Lorwyn was all about tribes, and this won't be the last Lord we see from that block. But yeah, Kithkin were basically just a white weenie tribe. Wizened Sen is nice because it is so efficient. Most Lords who bring 2/2 bodies with them cost 3 mana, but Wizened Sen only costs 2. And typically, it would come down on a board that was already really well populated with those little guys, quickly shifting favor in the game towards the Kithkin player. You would get a lot more than 2 mana's worth out of playing it most of the time. Kithkin decks were a real thing in both Block and Standard. At number 8, it is Imperious Perfect, which, like Wizened Sen, is a Lorwyn Lord. Imperious Perfect is an elf lord that can churn out elf tokens pretty efficiently. 1 mana to make a 1/1 elf is a pretty good deal, and the kind of mana that you will just have lying around on many turns without even trying. It's especially nice when you consider the fact that the elves it will make will be 2/2s if it's still in play. Elves are one of the best tribes at going wide, so the impact that +1/+1 can have on your whole board is enormous. In Standard, it was played in both mono-green and black-green elf decks. It also gained a single point in an extended version of black-green elves. At number 7, I have 2 Spirit Lords, Supreme Phantom and Drogskull Captain. I included both of them because I thought having 2 Spirit Lords on the list would keep us from being able to feature a wider variety of lords. And in Modern, these 2 were even played in the same deck. Supreme Phantom is a legitimate number 7, while the Captain would have been number 8. Drogskull Captain is actually the older of the 2, and like Mirror of Avabruck, it's from Innistrad, a plane where the blue-white color pair is all about spirits. The Captain gives your spirits the usual Lord boost of +1/+1, but also grants them Hexproof, one of the game's more powerful keyword abilities. This means if you have 2 in play, they will both have Hexproof, and that will really torment your opponent. Supreme Phantom is more efficient than the Captain is, granting the Spirit stats boost and coming with a 1/3 flying body, all for only 2 mana. One of the weird things about this Phantom is that it was printed in a set with barely any other spirits. As a result, it wasn't played at all in Standard, and it wasn't even very good in Limited. Luckily for it though, banned spirit decks have taken off in both Modern and Pioneer, and it has performed quite well in both of those formats. At number 6, it is Depala, Pilot Exemplar, who is a lord for both dwarves and vehicles. She was featured in the very first set to have vehicles, Kaladesh, and there were some seriously powerful ones around, including the completely busted Smuggler's Copter and the merely very good Ethersphere Harvester. Adding stats boost to those cards was pretty awesome, as was the fact that if she ever tapped, which would include crewing a vehicle, you could sink some mana into her triggered ability and find another dwarf or vehicle. Depala was at the center of a variety of different vehicle decks while she was in Standard, with the Mardu version being the most successful. While Depala's ability to pump vehicles came up a little more often than her ability to pump dwarves, she was also played alongside Toolcraft Exemplar and Veteran Motorist, so she got some pretty nice mileage out of both of her favorite creature types. Depala has yet to gain any points outside of Standard, though being printed in Kaladesh Remastered might mean she'll be changing that in the future. At number 5, I have included 4 Merfolk Lords: Lord of Atlantis, Mero Regieri, Master of the Pearl Trident, and Coral Helm Commander. Like with Spirits, I thought it would be best to discuss these all together. Having Merfolk Lords occupy 4 separate spots on this list would have been a little bit silly and pretty boring. But yeah, as you can see, Merfolk have no shortage of awesome lords, and that is what makes them one of the most successful tribal decks in the entire game, putting up points across all of the game's various formats. Lord of Atlantis is one of the game's original lords appearing in Alpha. He's the only one of the lords for the game's 5 representative tribes that costs only 2 mana and comes with a 2/2 body. At least, in addition to Master of Pearl Trident, which I'll get to in the moment. Like all of that cycle of lords, it also grants Landwalk. Note, by the way, that it does give all Merfolk the bonus, which does include your opponents. That's how all the old school lords work. Mero Regieri brings the lords boost as well as the ability to tap and untap stuff when you play Merfolk. Master of the Pearl Trident is almost identical to Lord of Atlantis, except it only pumps your Merfolk, which makes it better in most ways. Lastly, there's Coral Helm Commander, which does not begin life as a lord, but if you level it up enough, it becomes one. All of these have been played in multiple formats, with Lord of Atlantis holding a considerable advantage because it's so much older than the other cards. At number 4, it is Scion of Una, a fairy lord. In addition to giving +1/+1 to all fairies, the Scion also gives all of your fairies Shroud, a keyword ability that makes it very difficult for anyone to interact with them. The fact that the Scion comes with Flash is no minor thing either, as playing this at instant speed can effectively counter a removal spell that was targeting one of your fairies, in addition to having a bit of additional upside as a combat trick of sorts. Like Imperious Perfect and Wizened Sen, Scion of Una is a Lorwyn lord. Blue-Black in particular was all about fairies on that plane. And of all the tribes in Lorwyn, fairies made the biggest impact on the game, finding considerable success not only in Block and Standard, but also in Modern and Extended. One of the things that made fairies so good was that they were an aggro control tribe. Many of the fairies, like the Scion, could allow you to do things at instant speed, which also meant you could hold up counter magic and other spells. The Scion coming into play was frequently absolutely devastating. At number 3, it is Master of Waves, another Merfolk, but this one isn't actually a Merfolk lord, it's an Elemental lord. Master of Waves brings a bunch of elementals into play when he comes down. On his own, he'll be a 4-mana 2/1 that also makes a 2/1 elemental creature token, which is not a bad deal, and most of the time it's going to be bringing a lot more to the table than that. The Master does have the downside that if it dies, all of its elemental friends will die too, but the efficiency here is great and worth the risk. And hey, protection from red does mean it can't be killed by a lot of cheap burn spells at the very least. Master of Waves helped make Devotion to Blue decks into one of the best decks in Standard, and it has gained several points in modern Merfolk decks as well. At number 2, it is Lyra Dawnbringer, an Angel Lord. On her own, she's definitely one of the scarier lords in the game, since even without that part of the card, she's a 5-mana 5/5 with flying, first strike, and lifelink. Large flying creatures with lifelink tend to be a real problem. They make it pretty impossible to race because every time they hit an opponent, they create a gap of double their power, in this case 10 life, between you and your opponent. On top of that, because she has first strike, that means she can even hang back and block super efficiently in a pinch too. It was played primarily in more aggressive decks in Standard, like Vehicles, Boros Aggro, and even the Boros Angels deck, which got maximum value out of Lyra Dawnbringer. Lyra has been played in Modern too, primarily in the sideboard of blue-white control decks. Against more aggressive opponents who don't play much removal that can deal with the 5/5, Lyra Dawnbringer can be pretty insurmountable thanks to lifelink. Lyra doesn't have any points in Pioneer just yet, but it is being played in blue-white control decks in the format, and it wouldn't surprise me for it to get a top 8 at some point. And at number 1, it is Nightpack Ambusher, which is a wolf and werewolf lord. Kind of like Lyra, Nightpack Ambusher is incredibly powerful on its own, even in a deck with 0 other wolves. This is because it's a 4-mana 4/4 with flash that churns out wolf tokens on turns where you don't play anything, and frequently, it's just going to be best not to cast something, since a free 3/3 wolf is a big deal, especially if your deck is mostly cards that you're going to be casting on your opponent's turn anyway. If that's the case, you're not really giving anything up. And it just so happens that Standard, ever since it was printed, has been filled with decks interested in taking that approach. This has included decks like Wilderness Reclamation, which spend lots of turns just pumping their excess mana into powerful activated abilities, so the Ambusher will be making some wolves there pretty often. It has also been played in Simic Flash decks where it fits in nicely for obvious reasons. While it doesn't have any points outside of Standard just yet, it is being played in Historic, Pioneer, and Modern. It just hasn't gained any points in those formats so far. Well, those are the best lords in all of Magic. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on the 310 plus MTG Top 10s I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.